Live. I'm Amanda Hosenfeld.
And I'm Michelle Zahowski.
And today we have a great interview for you. We spoke with Solomon Carter, this is wonderful ethics and compliance expert.
Yeah, he leads the Physicians Group Practices, Patient Financial Services, and Office of Professional Development at Emory Healthcare in Atlanta. He is also the Executive Director of All Power in His Hands Christian Mission.
He was just a fantastic interview. We learned so much from him. And before we throw the interview at you, Mark from accounting would like everybody to know that this podcast is sponsored by Compliance Line. So thank you to Compliance Line for offering this space for valuable compliance and ethics related content.
Now let's get to that interview.
You don't want to do the social medias?
No.
Follow us on Please follow us out on our social media. We are at Twitter at Compliance Live. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and especially on LinkedIn at Compliance Line. Now you can say that thing.
Okay, now get to the interview.
All right, enjoy the interview. Solomon, welcome. We're excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. So when we met in our pre-meeting, I just wanted to let you know that I've taken kind of something that you said and I've run with it. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that I've copyrighted it and that you are no longer allowed to have the rights to it. So we are now calling ourselves the TMZ of compliance podcasts.
Good.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
So you get zero royalties from that. I'm just letting you know.
That's all right. That's all right. It'll be fine.
So, but thank you for that, by the way, because it's our new thing.
Sure.
I know when I was growing up and I was little, I didn't kind of think about, wow, when I grow up, I want to be in compliance.
Sure.
But did that happen for you? Is compliance always kind of something that you've been working towards?
Sure. So that is an excellent segue, actually, because I was kind of in the exact same situation. Originally, I was engaging in compliance activities and didn't even know what compliance was. So I have always thoroughly enjoyed writing. I have a passion for writing. I believe that that is my gift. And so I was writing policies and procedures. And so as I matriculated through several roles, I was always the policy guy and the procedure guy and the rules and regulations guy. And certainly what was somewhat congruent with that are the leadership positions that I had, and that I had to enforce some of those things. And so over a period of time, I came to learn that I was the compliance guy before I knew what compliance was, right? And so that wound up happening until I matriculated into a director role and gained my expertise in compliance, and then started doing some consulting and some other things. And then somewhat in a linear fashion, I'm a professional development guy as well. And so there came a time in consultancy and serving as the chief curriculum development officer for a firm and working with the federal government that I realized, particularly when teaching leadership classes and some of the subcategories that derive from leadership, I realized that I could not teach leadership without also teaching compliance. And I felt that they went hand in hand. And in addition to that, I saw a gap in that there were leaders who would tell training what to do, but they didn't have expertise in training, right? And then you have, in some cases, leaders telling compliance what to do, or compliance operating independently. But in order for compliance to be successful, I believe that training has to be at the forefront of everything that compliance does. So from my standpoint, how is it that training and compliance don't work hand in hand? You're not going to have people being compliant unless they're properly trained. And so the two kind of came together, and that's kind of how I got into it. Then certainly in addition to that, I serve as the executive director for All Power in His Hands Christian Mission, which is a mission and aid organization operating in Haiti. We have a food program and a medicine program and some other things. And lo and behold, in that role, we don't have a compliance officer. That kind of fell on me as well. And so certainly when operating in a third world country and some of the nuances and intricacies associated with doing that, compliance is a really big deal. And so between all of that, I started there came a time when I started contributing to the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and the HCCA publications, and I thoroughly enjoyed that and my expertise in that and consulting. And then here I am, so to speak.
Yeah,
Hopefully
so
that's
that's how we found you. I actually saw one of your articles in Compliance Week and reached out and asked you to join us today, and we're so glad that you were able to. In reading some of the other articles that you kind of sent us, some of your work, a lot of it focuses on, the company culture and training, which is Amanda's love language, by the way.
It is.
excellent.
So you're talking about policy and writing and procedure, and Michelle's over here. I don't know if you could hear her through the mic, but she's kind of giggling because those are my, like, I love those. I love policy and procedure so much. And of course, training is my thing. The compliance is often seen kind of like the department of no. Right? No, you can't do that. No, you shouldn't do that. No, we should do it this way. No, you can't train that way. You have to train this way. Do you see that as true? Or is there like a space for us to get to compliance is the yes? Does that question make any sense?
It does. It does. It makes perfect sense. So what I have found is compliance divisions or compliance offices, so to speak, rely on the no, as you have said, but unfortunately they're missing the mark because no is a good tool, but it is not the best way to have the positive results that you want. It's a tool, and it is not the resource. It's a small component of what it takes in order to have success. If telling people no is all that it took for people to be compliant, then there wouldn't be a need for a compliance department in the first place, right? And so, yeah, it's a resource. And so what happens is people mistaken no, which is just a tool, for a way to solve a comprehensive problem, right? And so what happens is, from a compliance standpoint, I find that people will say, hey, we told them no 50 times, and we've told them no 1,000 different ways. Why didn't they do it? And now that they have not done what we have asked of them, there needs to be disciplinary measures. And so what that does is that puts organizations on the proverbial hamster wheel, right? Because no is not a form of training. Again, it is simply a tool. And so I have some examples of that I'd be happy to share with you if you like. Absolutely. One example, I think that is somewhat profound, and there are a couple that we can go over, but one, and I think a really profound example, is telling a child, and we'll say a young woman or a young man, so for the purposes of this conversation, if I say a young man or a young woman, I mean both, right? Telling your daughter, don't get pregnant. And then lo and behold, your daughter gets pregnant, and you say as a parent, I told him 100 times to not get someone pregnant. Okay, so saying that is a tool, but that's not how we have profound outcomes in success, right? So there are a lot of other things that need to take place in order to ensure that we have success, right? Were you communicating with this child's friends? Were you listening to see the kind of language that your daughter's friend was using that would give you an indication as to the kind of household that she's coming from? Did you get your daughter involved in the math club, in the volleyball, in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Are you spending time with your daughter? Did you use motivational techniques to help your daughter understand, to help your son understand? Listen, you work at Domino's Pizza and you like on payday to buy 100 Hot Pockets, and you like to buy this kind of makeup, or essentially from an adult standpoint, you like to waste your money on these 50 different things, right? If you have a child, happy time is over. All of the things that you want to do, that you enjoy doing freely, you are not going to be able to do if you have a child under these circumstances. There can be religious implications. You can go down the list and explain through motivational techniques. You like going to Vegas, right? Mommy and daddy, and we go to Vegas and we like to stay at the Aria, at the Cosmopolitan. We like the Venetian. We like to do, but if you get pregnant if you get someone pregnant, your money is going to go towards mom and daddy have to help you, and it's going to be the Motel 6. You don't like the Motel 6. You like the concierge level at the Venetian, don't you, right?
Sure do.
And then, right. And then you're going to take them to the Motel 6 and say the service here is a little bit different than the service there. And if you get pregnant, if you get someone pregnant, this is where we're going to stay when we come to Vegas. And so, of course, that's, these are the things that you have to do. That's training. You have to pour into the child. And so we don't have that. We have adults saying, but I told them no 1,000 times. And so I liken that to compliance, right? We told them no 1,000 times, but did you distill the concepts? Did you cause people to inherently want to do the right thing within themselves as opposed to attempting to browbeat them with compulsion techniques? And so, so that's one example. There are others, but that's certainly one example in terms of how compliance is thought of, how it is utilized to shape human behavior to have the kind of successful outcomes that we want.
I love that example.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I agree with the Hot Pockets thing, but I no, I'm just,
Sure.
but the I have a question about that. So
Sure.
you say you gotta pour into in your example the child, but in like an office or a compliance environment, you gotta pour into your people.
Sure.
Does that always equate to money? And there's a lot of that thought that compliance is a cost center, like compliance doesn't do anything but spend money. How do those two things apply into your kind of thought?
Sure, that's a great question, actually. So professional development for me is really the end all be all, right? Because generally when people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's a training issue. You will have individuals at any given time to go on a detour and frolic. You're always going to have someone to kind of go off and do their own thing, right? But by and large, people want to be pleasing to their organizations. They want to be pleasing to their leaders, but they need the tools. And by engaging in top tier professional development, you can really help to ensure that. And then again, through using motivational techniques, through training and causing people unto themselves to want to do the right thing, right? Which is, again, looking at the analogy of the getting pregnant. You can't stop your son or stop your daughter enough, right? Because when they're in that moment in time, they may or may not be thinking about mommy and daddy. It has to be something within them. And so you want it to be the same way for employees. And the way that you do that is through offering top tier professional development to help them have the best understanding as to why they should do the right thing. So yes, there is a financial cost associated with that, but I would make the argument also that you want to do these things on the front end and not on the back end, because when you have to mitigate these challenges on the back end, the cost is always going to be more. You're going to pay longer, you're going to pay harder anyway. The key is to help leadership to have a firm understanding of those nuances and intricacies and to invest upfront what they'll be paying on the back end anyway.
So you mentioned these two terms, motivation versus compulsion techniques. And so why do you think it is that, like, humans in general, it seems, lean more towards that compulsion technique rather than the more effective motivational techniques?
Good question.
Sure.
Thanks.
So it is a good question. So the short answer is because they don't know any better. And it's a
is that a training thing? They don't know anything better because they haven't been trained that way?
That is correct.
Oh.
That is absolutely right.
Rare,
They simply don't know. And in lieu of not knowing, they defer to compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
No, using no, the tool, right? Again, no is not an intellectual methodology for teaching someone something, particularly something profound, right? They rely on what they know, and they go with the no or the other things in compulsion, because compulsion is a form of no, right? It's no, it's negative, right? And so they rely on those things instead of some of the motivational things that they could in order to get the greater sense of compliance that they are in fact looking for.
So when we spoke in our pre-meeting, you said something like super interesting, and I think it really shapes a lot of your thought process on that motivation versus compulsion. So you used to be a dog trainer.
That is correct.
And tell us how that kind of influences your view on compliance.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And so it's interesting how these outside experiences really helped to shape me professionally within the compliance and training space. And so, of course, here we go, the synergy. I always find the synergy between training and compliance, right? Because again, even in dog training, I was training some really, really serious dogs from overseas, Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds, police grade dogs from the Czech Republic and from Slovakia and from Holland, right? So these are some really, really tough dogs with some very, very serious assignments, right? But when you're training a dog to do something or not do something, there is an element of no. There are some things that you really do not want the dog to do in conjunction with the things that you want the dog to do, right? And so what I found is that when people are frustrated with their dogs and they're saying, here we go, listen carefully, I told the dog no. The dog knows that I don't want the dog to do that. And I say, tell me, what did you do to help the dog understand what you wanted it to do other than telling the dog no? And of course, people have a very difficult time answering that. And so I try to explain to people the frustration that you have should be with yourself because you don't know how to train the dog. You don't understand that dogs think like dogs. Dogs don't think like humans. Dogs hear differently. They receive information differently. And because you may not have that skill set, again, an analogy to compliance, always saying no and not understanding some of the training methodologies, because you don't understand that, now you're frustrated with the dog because you, in essence, kept telling the dog no and didn't really spend time training the dog and showing the dog how to do the thing that you don't want it to do or that you do want it to do because you lack the skill set to show the dog how to do that. And that's left with you then saying, the dog's not that bright. All dogs want to be very pleasing to their masters, right? And so people start using unflattering names with their dogs. They start talking about the intellect of the dog when lo and behold, they should be holding a mirror up because in actuality, they're talking about themselves, right? Because they don't know how to train the dog and what they want the dog to comply with, compliance. And so that's a really good lesson that I learned from that situation in terms of compliance, in terms of understanding situations, understanding your training capabilities, and being able to look at yourself objectively and say, have I done everything that I could have in order to train my staff to do the thing or to not do the thing that I did not want them to? And many times the answer is going to be a profound no, because they didn't know how, or they didn't understand that saying no, the same way we say that to Scooby, is not what it took to train the dog and to do the thing that you wanted it to do. If that makes sense.
It does. So like training a dog is more about training the human.
That is absolutely correct. It's training the human and not the dog. And so just to distill that concept a little bit more, teaching a dog to sit years ago was you would pop the collar on the dog and say sit. You pop the collar on the neck, the dog goes back and the dog sits, okay? The way through using a motivational, so that's compulsion. The way using a motivational technique is to take the treat, hold it in front of the dog, and then drive the dog back with the treat. And as the dog is looking up, inherently the backside sits, and then you pay the dog with the treat. That's a motivational technique, and you have greater success in teaching a dog to sit like that than popping the collar, because the dog is every time you tell the dog to sit, if you use compulsion as a foundation, the dog is getting a no and a sense of compulsion, and it's not particularly joyful when you tell the dog to sit because the dog is associating it with a form of a punishment, as opposed to you say sit and the dog is associating it with a trick. You will have greater success in the sit, in the down, in the stay, in the release a bite, and in everything that you want the dog to do. by using motivational techniques. And I submit to you
That worked on my
that
son.
yes, yes, it's true for humans as well, right? What's the motivational technique? Where sometimes we push the wrong buttons in compliance, and as a result, we tend to have a relapse of issues. And one of the things that I proselytize as well is that when you're having these relapse of issues, you're having an issue in New York, and another issue in Florida, and one in Ohio, and one in Africa, and one somewhere in Brazil. People aren't conspiring to give you agita. They're not conspiring to give you a difficult time. Is that there's a lack of understanding and training that requires more than what you have given, other than saying that they weren't allowed to do the thing that they did that you find to be dispositive.
Let me ask you this question, because I think that's a really interesting point. And in compliance, there's kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with this internal struggle that compliance officers have, but is it wrong to incentivize compliance? So to your point, we don't want to compel people to do it. We'd rather motivate them to do the right thing. But are they doing the right thing because they're getting rewarded for it? And what doesn't that lead to? Is that an ethical dilemma that people are getting rewarded for compliance?
Yeah, yeah. I know I'm saying this a lot, but that's another really good question. So forgive me for saying that. Okay, so by and large, the reward system, I don't know that it's necessarily needed, because if you're training a behavior and it's inherent, am I going to reward someone for waking up in the morning and breathing, right? So if it's cultural and someone is engaging in behavior that is contrary to what the culture is, then they are identified as an outlier. And it is anathema to what the program is, and there'll be no room for it to breathe. Now, perhaps in some of the more profound situations where you have a whistleblower identifying someone who stealing XYZ amount of money, so you can have a reward system in certain instances, but culturally, in terms of the day-to-day duties, that's not what's required if the training platform is as robust as it should be.
You said that's a good point. What made you say that?
Yeah, just like the focusing on the culture of your organization, that really seems like it has a lot to do with just how people kind of respond to either of these techniques. And if you're inherently using the motivational techniques, and that's like ingrained in your culture, that makes sense that those outliers would be the ones that you'd have to narc on, I guess.
Like weed out.
No, absolutely. And so when you're looking, and I don't want to get too technical, but in the federal sentencing guidelines, the infamous Chapter 8, it talks about one of the requirements is the organizational culture of your organization to properly influence that and create an ethical culture, right? And so in one of the articles that I wrote for the Compliance and Ethics magazine, it was an article entitled, "If the word culture didn't exist, it would be training." So what is culture, right? And so the definition that I've come up with is the culture of your organization is everything that you train and everything that you don't train. That's the culture of your organization. The void for someone to come in and engage potentially in wayward conduct, right? So there's a void there. So someone can then bring another culture into your organization and do things that are dispositive, and then ultimately the things that you train, right? It's what you train and what you don't train equals the culture of your organization. And so that speaks a little bit to what you're saying as well.
Speaking of things that you don't train, you mentioned in one of your articles, like accountability, like kind of a breakdown of accountability in relation to this concept of motivation versus compulsion techniques. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So to date, people view accountability again with compulsion and with punishment, right? So I'm saying that my team is going to be accountable, and the way that I believe as a leader, right, or as a compliance leader or compliance professional, the way that I know that they're going to be accountable is because if they do something other than what I ask, they're going to be punished. That's not training. Here we go. That's a tool. It's a compulsion tool but that's not an effective way to have the kind of positive outcomes and the kind of excellence that you want. Because remember, compliance also goes hand in hand with performance, right? Performance and compliance go hand in hand. You can't have outstanding performance and have poor compliance. So really compliance impacts everything. Now, as it relates to accountability, telling someone, if you do this, you'll be punished, is not a way to train someone on how to do anything. It never works. It's ephemeral at best. And organizations use that, unfortunately, as a platform and say, look, we fired Joe because here we go. Joe didn't do what we asked of him. And as a result, he's no longer here and we're holding people accountable. What does it mean to be accountable within your job description? What exactly does that look like? What are the behaviors that help to ensure that you can succeed within your role and be accountable within your role? Perform training, professional development to the standard, and make sure that everyone has root knowledge of what that looks like. And it is at that time that you can have accountability excellence, as opposed to saying, if you don't do this, then then the results are going to be negative in that. Again, if that's all that it took for people to be accountable, then everyone would be accountable, because I'd say be accountable or else, and then everyone would do it, right? No one would be suspended. No one would humiliate themselves on national television and steal money and embezzle money and be going to jail for all kinds of ridiculousness. I mean, the list goes on and on if all it took was to tell someone to not do something and then they not do it. And that's where compliance is really failing, quite frankly, and where I would like to see more professional development to insulate organizations from risk. Every position within an organization represents the first line of defense, and these methodologies go a long way in ensuring that.
So what are training is a word that's coming up a lot, and I love it, and I'm
It's
sure
fine.
she loves it.
Yeah, it's fine. I love it.
So talking about that in training and professional development, what are some other like tips or tricks or a place to start maybe for individuals that are looking to, or compliance professionals that are looking to focus on this more and kind of make a positive change in their organization?
Sure. So there's several things. I'll touch on one or two. The first thing is, one of the things that I like to say is, if you're not talking to me about a written policy, then you're only talking to me about an unwritten fantasy, right? And so where do we begin? It's with the written word, the policies and procedures. Are your policies and procedures robust? Are they what they should be? And then when it comes to training, how about starting with the thing that is written? If you want to know where to start to train on your policies and procedures. From the root to the fruit, you should have had training in every element of what is written in your organization. That's one. Two, you can look at disciplinary trends. Again, people aren't conspiring to give you a difficult time. Again, working with leadership, training, and compliance kind of all together, right? We can look at the disciplinary trends of an organization and say, hey, we're having these issues over and over again, different people in different continents, in different offices. They're not conspiring to do this to us. Let's look at that and let's have training on that. If you only look at the disciplinary infractions, of course, you're always looking at emerging trends as well, right? But if you look at the disciplinary infractions and your current policies and procedures, and you train to standard, it will help to insulate you from risk and ensure that your organization operates within the risk tolerances that are needed to have positive outcomes.
Yeah, I think in one of your articles you mentioned disciplinary action is basically, it's really an opportunity for organizations to, you know, instead of strictly using it as a, you know, shame on you punishment kind of situation, an opportunity to train the right behaviors into those folks. So I like where you're going there.
Or take a look at your policies and procedures and say, hey, what's lacking, if anything, in this, and it's going to open up training opportunities. So you can use it to understand why somebody would have done that action. Is it specifically put in the policy that they should not? And if the answer is no, then that's a great opportunity for the company.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you guys you're hitting it right on the head. That's exactly what's needed. And so, you know, looking at the disciplinary trends, it shouldn't be an HR secret. You know, this isn't a secret squirrel kind of thing. That, looking at the disciplinary trends, that information, right? And so what I would say is, you can take the names off of we don't care about who, we care about the infraction, right? And so if there are some issues with that, you can take the names off. We don't care what the names are. We care about what the infractions are. And we should take that information from HR and sit down with compliance and training and look at those trends and develop a robust training opportunity to mitigate those issues. Because again, people aren't conspiring here, and people don't really want to do the wrong thing. They want to do the right thing, right? And so one example of that is culturally, if a P card, a purchase card, and you're only allowed to use the purchase card for $100, but people keep using it for $300. Well, that's probably something cultural. At some juncture in their career, they have been told that it's okay to surpass the $100 and to go to the $300 mark, right? That's a training issue. It's something cultural that has to be shaped through superior training. Because ultimately, people want to do the right thing, but they may lack the direction. And the one way that they get the direction above all is through professional development.
I love it so much. Solomon, what's next for you? What's on your the rest of 2020 and into 2021 agenda that you're going to be tackling?
Sure. So there are a few things. I have done some work on COVID. I'm not gonna, we're all kind of COVIDed out. I think I just made that word up, right? We're kind of COVIDed out. Yeah. So, but one of the concepts that I have developed recently is helping compliance professionals and leaders in general to understand the blend of motivational techniques versus techniques in compulsion. And what I recommend is no less than a 70-30 blend, meaning 70% motivational and 30% compulsion, with the goal of going to 80-20, and then ultimately, right, 100-0, meaning that 100% of the people do the right thing because it is inherent, because they are well trained, and they do it without fear of punishment. They do it because it is the right thing to do, right? And so naturally, because of human nature, there's always going to, we're always going to have an element of compulsion. But when looking at the totality of compliance, it should really be very small. People should be compliant, not because of the hammer, but because of the sweet thing, but because of the honey, right? Not the hammer, but because of the honey. And so when you're reviewing your compliance dynamic, it should equal, along with training, it should equal a 70 baseline, 70-30. And then you're moving with a real goal to get to 80-20 and then 100%. And this is also achieved by, again, looking at the disciplinary trends and then having interviews with people. So it's not enough to just punish Johnny, but you want to say, what were you thinking about at that time? To kind of distill, what are the things that led Johnny to engage in the wayward conduct, right? And so once you get all of that data, you get all that intelligence, you can matriculate that into an opportunity to move from the 70-30, the 80-20, until the 100% zero. And when you have people independently on their own doing the right thing, and you're operating in that 100-0 zone, 90-10 zone, what you'll find is performance will go through the roof as well. And certainly, it's all about performance, right? Showing your baby. So, that's one of the things, probably one of the more profound things that I have been working on lately, and that I'd like to share with you in an exclusive for you all today.
Ooh, we had exclusive content.
Yay! That's awesome. I mean, yeah, it's kind of. I don't think it is realistic to expect that 100-0 mix right off the bat. So like
right.
Trying to use a combination to get you there is a great tactic to use.
Yeah.
Sure.
If people listen to this and they're like, I want to know more about this, I want to read more of Solomon's articles, where can they find you, or how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So unfortunately, I'm not the social media king that I feel that I should be. I know that so much is driven through social media, but I'm a really big proponent of the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics. I'm somewhat biased because they use a lot of my work, and I respect them, but I respect them anyway. And they have some really good articles, not just mine, but other things that you can really learn from. So I would recommend joining the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and the Healthcare Compliance Association. Those are two areas that you're going to find most of my work. And so I'll just leave it there and say that those two organizations. And then last but not least, I recommend that you all tune into Compliance Live because they have cutting edge information, and on a serious note, they're really providing quality information in the compliance space where there's a void, I think. And so by tuning in here, I think that viewers all over can really get a good feel for kind of top tier content that's needed in order to elevate themselves in, whatever areas that they're in, compliance, leadership, or otherwise.
Well, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much.
You're my favorite guest so far, by the way.
I
Just
appreciate
because he
that.
flattered you.
Yes, yes, I did. That's all it takes.
Thank you.
Well, Solomon, will you come back?
I will. It would be my honor. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, expert might steal him away, though.
So if anybody reaches out to you from our sister podcast, The Ethics Experts, say no, I'm exclusively, I have an exclusive contract with Compliance Live.
Okay. I'm going to make sure to do that.
Well, thanks again for joining us today. It was so great to talk to you and learn more about these techniques and
your work.
Yep.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a
All
pleasure.
Right.